The glittering world of high-profile entertainment has always maintained a razor-thin boundary between public perfection and private turmoil. For decades, audiences have been captivated by the seemingly flawless lives of television personalities who navigate the treacherous waters of fame, fashion, and perpetual scrutiny. In this highly manufactured environment, a person's appearance is often treated not just as a personal trait, but as a critical professional asset and a primary currency. Every camera angle, every layer of cosmetics, and every public appearance is meticulously calculated to project an image of absolute invulnerability and timeless youth. Yet behind this carefully constructed facade of glamour lies a fragile reality that the public rarely pauses to consider. The intense pressure to remain perpetually camera-ready creates a psychological crucible where any sign of physical vulnerability is viewed as a liability. When the cameras roll, there is no room for weakness, and the expectation to perform remains absolute, regardless of what may be occurring behind closed doors. This relentless demand for aesthetic perfection often forces individuals to mask their deepest struggles, transforming their daily existence into a quiet battlefield where personal health is sacrificed for public entertainment. As viewers, we consume these heavily edited narratives with an insatiable appetite, often forgetting that the individuals on our screens are human beings navigating the same complex, fragile biological realities as the rest of us. The disconnect between the highly polished on-screen persona and the raw, unscripted challenges of real life forms the backdrop of a modern tragedy that is becoming increasingly common in the spotlight, when a mysterious affliction begins to erode this carefully maintained veneer. The consequences are both physically devastating and profoundly isolating. Imagine waking up to find that the very features that defined your public identity are changing in ways you cannot control, explain, or reverse. For someone whose livelihood depends entirely on being recognized and admired, a sudden and unexplained transformation of the physical self is not merely a medical emergency, it is an existential crisis. The initial signs are often subtle, perhaps a slight swelling, an unusual texture, or a persistent discomfort that can easily be brushed aside as temporary exhaustion or the minor side effects of a demanding lifestyle. However, when these minor anomalies refuse to dissipate and instead begin to escalate into visible structural changes, the underlying anxiety turns into a pervasive sense of dread. The public, ever vigilant and hypercritical, quickly notices the slightest deviation from the established norm, leading to a barrage of speculation, harsh commentary, and invasive rumors. This public scrutiny magnifies the internal panic, creating a claustrophobic environment where the individual must simultaneously battle an unknown biological adversary and defend their dignity against a judgmental audience. The struggle ceases to be a private matter of healing and becomes a public spectacle, where every step toward finding a cure is documented, dissected, and debated by millions of strangers who lack empathy for the human suffering occurring beneath the surface. Navigating the complex labyrinth of the modern healthcare system under these circumstances introduces an entirely new layer of psychological ornament. When a patient presents with symptoms that defy standard diagnostic categories, the medical journey frequently becomes a series of frustrating dead ends, dismissals, and profound invalidation. For individuals dealing with rare or poorly understood conditions, the very institutions meant to provide clarity and healing often become sources of immense exhaustion. Medical professionals faced with ambiguous physical signs may default to skepticism, attributing severe physical symptoms to psychological stress, cosmetic procedures, or simple imagination. This pervasive pattern of medical dismissal leaves patients feeling entirely abandoned, forcing them to take on the exhausting role of their own advocates while their health continues to deteriorate. The search for a definitive answer can span years, requiring consultations with dozens of specialists and the expenditure of astronomical financial fortunes, all without any guarantee of a resolution. Each new appointment brings a brief glimmer of hope, only to be crushed by another vague diagnosis or another dismissive assertion that the issue is merely superficial. This continuous cycle of hope and disappointment erodes a person's resilience, turning what should be a scientific inquiry into a desperate, lonely pilgrimage for validation and relief. In the center of this terrifying intersection of public scrutiny, medical ambiguity, and personal suffering stands a well-known reality television icon whose life has been upended by a relentless health crisis. Brandi Glanville, a prominent figure widely recognized for her captivating and unfiltered presence on television screens across the globe, has recently brought her private nightmare into the open. known for her fearless demeanor and her willingness to speak her mind without hesitation. She has spent the last several years battling a series of bizarre and deeply distressing physical symptoms that have progressively altered her life and appearance. What began as a confusing sequence of facial swelling and unexpected structural changes soon transformed into a protracted medical mystery that defied the explanations of numerous healthcare providers. Despite her fame and access to resources, her journey has been marked by the same systemic challenges, dismissals, and clinical blind spots that plague everyday individuals seeking answers to invisible illnesses. As her condition evolved from an elusive aesthetic concern into a severe, debilitating struggle, the true depth of her hidden battle began to emerge, challenging everything she thought she knew about her body and her future. If you want to stay informed as this profound medical mystery unravels and follow every critical update on this ongoing story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and join our community. The progression of this enigmatic condition began to manifest in ways that were both highly visible and deeply alarming to someone accustomed to the unrelenting glare of public scrutiny. Initially, the symptoms were characterized by sudden and unpredictable episodes of facial swelling, an occurrence that was immediately seized upon by internet commentators and viewers who rushed to make harsh judgments. For a long time, the public narrative surrounding her appearance was dominated by unfair assumptions regarding cosmetic enhancements or lifestyle choices, completely ignoring the painful physical reality developing underneath the skin. However, as the temporary swelling began to subside, it gave way to a far more terrifying structural phenomenon, as parts of her face literally began sinking in. This profound loss of facial volume and tissue integrity was not a subtle shift. It was a drastic transformation that caused immense physical discomfort and emotional distress. Faced with a changing reflection and an increasingly critical audience, she embarked on a desperate quest for answers, consulting dozens of medical professionals in an attempt to decipher what was happening to her body. This medical pilgrimage quickly turned into a financial and emotional black hole, resulting in the expenditure of over $100,000 as she sought out specialists who might understand the underlying cause of this rapid deterioration. Unfortunately, instead of receiving definitive answers or definitive therapeutic interventions, she found herself trapped in a frustrating cycle of medical dismissal, where doctors repeatedly minimized her terrifying symptoms as mere scar tissue. The lack of clinical validation forced her to explore every possible explanation for her failing health, leading to a complex web of potential diagnoses and terrifying discoveries. At one point, her thoughts turned toward her past cosmetic surgeries, specifically her breast implants, wondering if a systemic failure within her own body was driving the localized destruction in her face. This suspicion was confirmed when it was discovered that she had suffered from ruptured breast implants, a condition that allowed leaking silicone to migrate through her lymphatic system. The realization that synthetic materials had potentially clogged her lymph nodes offered a partial explanation for the localized swelling and fluid retention, but it was far from the complete answer to her ongoing torment. The heavy burden on her immune system from the toxic silicone leak seemed to open the floodgates for even more bizarre and aggressive health complications. Not long after addressing the implant issue, she was confronted with an even more shocking and repulsive diagnosis: the presence of a persistent facial parasite. This agonizing parasitic infection plagued her for 3 long, grueling years, causing a chaotic cycle of temporary recovery followed by sudden, aggressive relapses that shattered her hopes of a full return to normalcy. Just when she believed she had finally eradicated the foreign organism and could begin a true aesthetic and physical recovery, the parasite returned with a vengeance earlier this year. Triggering a new wave of facial sinking and fluid accumulation, the physical limitations imposed by this dual assault of a parasitic infection and lymphatic collapse completely transformed her daily routine and stripped away her ability to participate in her professional life. For a prominent media personality, the simple act of applying makeup is not just a cosmetic choice, but an essential component of her daily uniform and professional identity. Yet, the extreme sensitivity and fluid retention in her face reached such a critical point that she found herself unable to tolerate cosmetics for more than 15 minutes at a time before experiencing severe discomfort that forced her to wash it all out. Why? This seemingly minor limitation speaks volumes about the sheer scale of the inflammation and biological distress occurring beneath her skin, rendering the basic requirements of her career completely impossible. The constant accumulation of fluid required painful, repetitive drainage treatments that provided only fleeting relief before the swelling and subsequent structural sinking returned. The psychological toll of watching one's own face change shapes, combined with the physical exhaustion of continuous medical procedures, created an isolated existence that stood in stark contrast to her formerly vibrant public persona. She was forced to candidly share these deeply personal details on her podcast, admitting to her listeners that she was completely lost, terrified, and unable to comprehend why her body seemed to be failing her so fundamentally after she thought she was finally cured. The ongoing biological crisis was further complicated by a startling new development that added a layer of profound dread to an already overwhelming situation. During a recent medical evaluation which she sought out after growing increasingly concerned about a specific lump that had been present in her face for years, doctors finally discovered something that previous examinations had completely overlooked. Nestled deep within one of the delicate lymph nodes in her face was a distinct tumor, a revelation that instantly heightened the stakes of her long-running medical mystery. While subsequent testing provided the immense relief that the growth was benign and entirely non-cancerous, its presence offered a critical and damning piece of the puzzle that explained her chronic suffering. This benign tumor had been acting as a physical roadblock within her facial anatomy, explaining why fluid was continuously trapped, why her face was sinking, and why her body had been entirely unable to clear out the remnants of her previous infections. The discovery was bittersweet as it underscored the profound negligence she had experienced from numerous doctors over the years who had dismissed that exact same lump as trivial scar tissue from non-existent facelifts. This crucial revelation marked a turning point in her narrative, exposing the dangerous gaps in her medical care and setting the stage for a deeper exploration of how this physical crisis intersected with the immense pressures of her public life. The discovery of the benign tumor in her facial lymph node provided a long overdue explanation for years of chronic suffering, but it also highlighted a deeply concerning reality regarding the vulnerabilities of the human body and the complexities of modern medicine. For Brandi Glanville, this diagnosis was not just a clinical finding, it was a profound vindication after years of being told by medical professionals that her physical symptoms were imaginary, superficial, or merely the result of aging and scar tissue. The revelation that a physical mass had been actively blocking her lymphatic drainage system explained the chaotic cycle of swelling and subsequent tissue sinking that had systematically dismantled her facial structure and eroded her self-confidence. This structural blockage created a stagnant environment within her facial tissues, making it nearly impossible for her body to naturally combat the recurring parasitic infection that had plagued her for 3 agonizing years. The intersection of a ruptured breast implant leaking silicone into her lymphatic network, a persistent parasitic invasion, and a hidden tumor created a perfect storm of medical adversity that would have overwhelmed even the strongest individual. It serves as a stark reminder that behind the highly polished, dramatic world of reality television, these celebrities are bound by the very same biological vulnerabilities as anyone else, facing life-altering health crises that cannot be scripted, edited, or easily resolved by fame and fortune. To truly understand the profound impact of this health crisis, one must look closely at the remarkable journey of Brandi Glanville and the unique position she occupies in the landscape of modern popular culture. Emerging into the public consciousness as a fashion model before transitioning into one of the most polarizing and memorable figures on television, she built her entire career on a foundation of absolute transparency and raw honesty. On a screen populated by highly manicured personalities who often carefully guard their public images, she stood out by refusing to filter her thoughts, emotions, or personal struggles, a characteristic that earned her both fierce loyalty from fans and intense criticism from detractors. This unfiltered approach to life is precisely what led her to share her medical journey in such vivid, unvarnished detail on her podcast, transforming her private pain into a public conversation about medical gaslighting and bodily autonomy. Her long and arduous journey from the glamorous heights of Hollywood social circles to the isolating confines of a chronic illness highlights a deeper narrative about resilience and the high cost of living life in the public eye. By openly discussing her struggles with a facial tumor, a recurring parasite, and the devastating effects of leaking silicone, she has effectively demystified the idealized illusion of celebrity perfection, showing her audience the painful, unglamorous reality of fighting to regain her health, The timing of this debilitating physical collapse adds an even heavier layer of emotional complexity to her story, as the onset of her mysterious symptoms closely coincided with some of the most stressful and professionally damaging allegations of her career. The intense psychological trauma of facing public accusations of misconduct while filming a prominent television spin-off in Morocco served as an incredibly hostile backdrop to her initial physical decline. The prolonged legal disputes, media scrutiny, and acute stress resulting from these public controversies undoubtedly placed an immense burden on her immune system, potentially accelerating her susceptibility to infections and exacerbating her underlying lymphatic issues. The profound connection between extreme psychological distress and physical health is well documented, and for her, the simultaneous collapse of her professional reputation and her physical appearance created an environment of total devastation. Throughout this entire ordeal, her legal and public representatives have steadfastly maintained her innocence, emphasizing that the intense stress of these unproven accusations has severely impacted both her mental and physical well-being for far too long. This dual battle against public condemnation on one side and a terrifying, mysterious illness on the other illustrates the sheer magnitude of the adversity she has been forced to navigate over the past several years. Looking forward, the road to recovery for the television personality remains filled with significant challenges. Yet the definitive identification of the tumor offers a crucial pathway toward true healing and rehabilitation. With the mystery finally solved, medical specialists can now develop a targeted, comprehensive treatment plan designed to safely remove the obstruction, restore proper lymphatic circulation, and finally eradicate the lingering effects of the facial parasite. This long-awaited medical intervention holds the promise of halting the progressive sinking of her facial features, allowing her tissues to rebuild and heal after years of chronic inflammation and fluid accumulation. For an individual who has spent her life being defined by her vibrant appearance and expressive on-screen presence, the prospect of a true physical and aesthetic recovery is a profound milestone that goes far beyond simple vanity. It represents the potential reclamation of her identity, her career, and her ability to step back into the spotlight without the paralyzing fear of judgment or physical agony. Her ultimate goal remains to achieve a complete recovery, a true personal transformation that will allow her to put on makeup